Hello Sword Fam, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Brittany. Today I'm going to be talking about the HF Armory Black Knight Gloves. These are the Black Knight Gloves from HF Armory based in Ukraine. Recently they've been getting a lot of attention and for really good reason. Hard plastic sparring gloves like these ones are not new to the market, but what makes these really special is they have a wider variety of sizes, and for the first time ever, I was actually able to find a glove that fit my tiny little hands. A lot of folks in the HEMA community might be more familiar with another type of hard plastic sparring glove, such as the Spez Heavies, for example. That's these. Very similar design, however, I've really not been super happy with the Spez Heavies. That's not what this review is about, but I do want to point out a couple of differences between the Spez Heavies, which happen to be the most popular and have most of the market cornered for this style of glove, and the difference between that and these new HF Armory gloves. So this is my personal glove. It is my own Spez Heavy. It is a size small, but you can see that small is sort of subjective in this case. The biggest problem I've had with these gloves is just how large they were overall. I can get my hand in there, which is great, but unfortunately, my hand is here. I've got a huge amount of room in here. My fingers fall pretty short inside the glove, and it leaves several inches of room here that when I ended up grabbing the sword, you can see my fingers, maybe, actually start coming past the actual protection of the glove. And I'm not usually able to just close my hand very well. These have been super broken in. But the overall bulk of this, it seemed like the plates weren't scaled down for each size. So I always felt like I was wearing, Spez Heavies in a size large with just a smaller inner glove, and that never really worked for me. The other problem is that there's a new issue with Spez Heavies in the last, I would say 2 years-ish, where the new, I don't know if it's a new design, if it's a new material lot, I don't actually know what's going on, but I've had 3 brand new pairs of Spez Heavies come into my school and break upon the first sparring session. And when I say break, I mean catastrophic failure, where one of these 3 main plates had broken either completely across, had snapped completely in half, or had other large breaks happen where it basically renders the glove useless. I'm not sure if Spez is aware of that issue, but for that reason, until that gets fixed, I do not want to recommend these gloves. Enter the HF Armory gloves. So what makes these great is the size. You can see they're already quite a bit smaller. They're still a little bit bulky, obviously, but the key difference here is I ended up getting an extra small, which when I put my hand in there, my fingers are right here where they need to be, so there's no unnecessary stretching of the leather inside. The other thing is I actually have a lot of mobility, and when I close my hand, all of the gaps are sealed up, which is really, really important. These are made in a similar way to the Spez Heavies with the overlapping plates, but what's really, really great about this is that as you close this down, it ends up closing out a lot of the gaps, which is awesome. The thumb is also a lot more low profile, and it has a lot of movement. You can see that the way that the plates are riveted in, there's a lot of movement laterally, backwards and forwards. You have a lot of articulation in the thumb. Another design aspect I really like about these HF Black Knight gloves is this cuff. Now, if I'm just wearing it on my bare hand with a bare arm, this is actually really, really large, and it looks kind of comical on me. However, once I actually put on my fencing jacket, I have my arm guards, it fills it out pretty nicely. But the fact that this bell here is actually hard has been wonderful. The amount of wrist protection that I gain from this is awesome. You'll notice the gap between this bell and this plate here. Underneath here is another plate. It is a hard plastic plate. One of the shortcomings for the Spez Heavies is this area for protection. When we look at the bell at the bottom of the gauntlet here, you can see that this is actually soft. There are some hard plates put in right here, but these gaps have nothing in them. It's completely soft. There's also this gap right here in the wrist. The only thing protecting this area is this piece of leather. There is no plate protecting that gap. I have been hit here before and it really does hurt. So having that actually be closed out with the Black Knight gloves is awesome. I really love the thoughtfulness of that design. Another feature of the HF glove that I think was really well thought out is how the plates overlap in a way that closes out any gaps. For example, right here in the thumb, you can see this part right here, this plate that's underneath, that actually closes out this part of the hand right here. Unfortunately, with the Spez Heavies, that gap right there is not closed, and that has been a vulnerability for a really long time in Spez Heavies. You also notice here in between, this can separate depending on how you move your hands. This separation is a very vulnerable spot if you're getting a cut coming over the top of the hands. The HF glove blocks that out completely, and you can see that there is no exposed fabric or material. Part of the HF glove that I do really like as well is you'll notice the stitching here on the bottom plate towards the end of the fingers. What this stitching does is it attaches the inner glove completely into the plate, so that when you pull the fingers down, the plate actually comes with it fully. You'll notice in the Spez Heavy that this is the complete opposite design. You have the fingers here, there's a gap, and while these are sewn in under the plate here and held in with a rivet, as I pull my fingers down, you can see that my fingers will pull the inner glove first, and now there's a large gap right in here. The problem with this is that over time, this leather internally will start to stretch. So now I can start pulling my fingers away from the glove, and now they can be exposed. By sewing in that bottom plate completely, you actually minimize that dramatically. Let's talk for a second about the thumb protection that's available on these Black Knight gloves. One of the things they've done is they've actually reinforced the glove on the inside with extra material that is super thick, and that's going to prevent the thumb from breaking through or eventually wearing through the fabric on the inner glove. This is actually a really common thing I see in Spez Heavies after a lot of use, is that the inner glove will tear where the fingers start kind of pressing through and stretching. One of the common places is for the thumb to bust right through, but I don't see that being a problem with the HF gloves because of this reinforced fabric here. What also makes this thumb protection really great is that it actually encapsulates the thumb almost entirely. It doesn't actually come over the thumb tip, which maybe be an issue in the future, but so far I haven't had that be an issue. The shape of it though actually sheds away a lot of blows in a way that actually prevents direct hits from being super impactful. So the shape of the thumb is very different from the Spez Heavy. However, different models of Spez Heavies have updated the thumbs over time. The ones I have are an older version which clearly have design flaw issues. The articulation on the thumb is also really great, and again, we've already talked about how the plates overlap in a way that prevents any gaps or any sort of exposed fabric or anything that could be really dangerous for the thumb. So the thumb protection on this has so far been really great. Something to be aware of, however, with the HF gloves is that the black dye on the inside of this glove can sometimes come off on the hands when you're first using it. So as you're breaking in your glove and using it for the first couple of times, you might notice that your hands have like a blue-black bit of dye. That goes away after a while, don't worry, but it is something that was like, not frustrating, but I mean, something to consider if you care about that kind of thing. The design and the materials used for this glove lend themselves to be really protective and extremely durable. So I think in that case, this glove is really awesome. I feel super safe using it in steel longsword sparring. I also feel safe using it for something like steel sword and buckler. And then of course you can always like just go down from there in terms of like heavy sparring. I think this is great for synthetics. I can't imagine it being any kind of a problem for saber or messer either. So having these kind of covers all of your bases in a really good way, so you don't have to have a bunch of gloves to do a bunch of different things. One of the most well thought design aspects for the HF Armory glove, the Black Knight, is it doesn't really require a lot of maintenance. And if you've owned Spez Heavies for any length of time, you probably have to put a lot of time into maintaining it. What I mean by that is the Spez Heavies always need to have the little ties replaced. There's these like little cords that are supposed to go in through these holes that hold the inner glove to the actual shells itself, and every single plate is sort of like held together with these little bungee ties. Some people have found ways to reduce that maintenance. They will put in more durable strings, for example, use zip ties, thing like that. But you have to always keep it up, and before you go into a tournament, you have to check every single little thing, like, oh, this one's missing, I need to replace that one, which is kind of a pain in the butt. And I don't want to have to keep thinking of that every time and have to do that just to be able to wear my gloves. Whereas the HF gloves have completely just moved away from that entirely. You can see all of these rivets here. This is actually what holds the glove in completely. And you don't have to worry about any ties. The only place that you have the bungee ties are going to be right here at the wrist as it comes through underneath and then locks it in here. What's really nice about that design is that the likelihood of that string getting cut with a feather is very, very unlikely, because that is often covered by the plates. So I don't think that that'll be an issue, but that's the only tie on this glove that has any risk of breaking. And then of course you have the inner tie here to tighten or allow for a little bit of expansion in the wrist. But again, you're not going through this glove trying to, redo all of the ties like you would with a Spez Heavy, and that's actually something I really, really appreciate. But let's talk a little bit about the dexterity, because let's be honest, you can have a super protective glove that doesn't really allow you to do the techniques that you actually want to use, and that can be a downfall. Fortunately for the Black Knight gloves, I think that they pass that test with flying colors. For me, as a person who really enjoys doing sword and buckler, one of the major deciding factors for me in getting a glove is, will it fit in a buckler? What I don't want to do is have a heavy glove for my sword hand and then a lacrosse glove for my buckler hand. I have, unfortunately, taken some hand hits behind the buckler using nothing but a lacrosse glove that doesn't cover my wrist, and I paid for it dearly later. So when I do steel sword and buckler fighting, I want to make sure that my heavy glove will also fit on my buckler hand. In which case, we'll test that out with none other than the cold steel buckler. This is probably the most common buckler I think that you see for most HEMA people. I think it's pretty standard and it's a good test. In which case, it fits. And not only does it fit, but it fits with room to move. Having that room to move has always been really important to me. I like to manipulate the buckler in a lot of different ways. If I take my size small Spez Heavy, it will fit inside the buckler, but it kind of gets caught. My thumb ends up getting caught in there a lot, and so I try to not manipulate the buckler too much. I don't really like that, and I sort of just have to put it in there and just hope for the best. So I think that the HF glove fits much better in your standard size cold steel buckler than the Spez Heavies do. So that's a win in my book. So speaking of sword and buckler, talking about the dexterity and handling. So I've got my glove on my right hand and my favorite sword and buckler sword, which is the Klobowski arming sword. That's perfect. I love it. The glove fills the hilt perfectly, and I don't feel like it's jamming up into the pommel at all. I don't feel like I'm getting locked in on the crossguard like I would with my Spez Heavies. This is actually a really nice fit, and that makes basically doing sword and buckler so much easier. So now I can just use these gloves and I don't have to worry about my hands getting hurt, and I don't have to worry about the dexterity at all either. So, and I can switch to my thumb grip fairly easily if I want to do that and get some false edge cuts and go back to my standard grip like nothing, right? You hardly even notice it. So this is awesome for a single hand sword like an arming sword. All right, so obviously the next test has to be longsword. So I've got a Siggy standard here. I can get both hands on there, a little bit of room to spare, which is nice for me. For folks with bigger hands, you will probably have a little bit less room than I will, But again, with a standard length Siggy fetter, I don't think it'll be an issue. The nice thing though is that it's not so bulky that it's like jamming up right into the crossguard, which has been an issue that I faced a lot with Spez Heavies. Just to do a quick comparison here, you can see how much more space those Spez Heavies take up on this sword. And then because of the way that the plates don't overlap, you can see how the crossguard gets stuck sometimes right in between these two plates. And I've had that be a factor before where it kind of gets caught on my glove if I feel like I don't have enough room on the hilt to actually create a little bit of space. I use a Siggy Shorty when I fence, and that has a much shorter hilt, so it usually will not fit both of my hands with Spez Heavies, but they do fit with my HF Black Knights. I feel like the Black Knight HF gloves are game-changing because now there's no longer a monopoly, or like there's not a corner of the market that is kind of controlled by one vendor. And I think that that's awesome. This design is really well thought out. I think they've put a lot of time and effort into really trying to see how they could improve on the standard just heavy sparring glove design. Obviously, not having 5 fingers, you guys know how I feel about that if you watched my other articulated 5-finger glove reviews before. I think sticking with the kind of clamshell large plate is generally safer, so seeing this design really makes me happy. From a customer service standpoint, HF was just amazing to work with. I reached out to him by email. I said, hey, I'm looking for these gloves, you know, what can I do? What can I get? I've got really small hands. And they suggested getting the extra small pair, which is what I have here. They also have small, medium, large, obviously, and those sizes are actually accurate. What was cool is that I took my measurements and I was like, okay, this is what it should be. And then when I got the gloves in person, I felt like the measurements they included on the website were very accurate to the product I was receiving. Sometimes what I found with previous vendors is they'll have what they say is their sizing. You do, you measure yourself and it should be fitting, and then it doesn't. That was not the case with HF. They were actually very, very true to size, which I thought was awesome. Obviously, the current state of affairs with the Ukraine-Russia war right now has some people concerned about buying products from Ukraine because they might not receive them or there will be a delay. I was really, really, really impressed with their ability to persevere and basically get my gloves. Like, they were super, super open and very, very easy to communicate with. Basically, they said, hey, this is how long we expect these gloves to take. There might be a couple weeks delay, but we'll keep you very, very, very up to date. And they did. So at no point was I sitting there kind of wondering, being like, oh man, like, where are my gloves? What happened? What's the update? No, they communicated very, very well throughout the whole process. I found them very easy to work with, and they were actually very friendly, and they checked in with me afterwards, wanted to make sure I liked it. And so I think from a customer service standpoint, they were incredible to work with. The price point on these is pretty comparable to Spez Heavies as well, so you don't have to pay an insane amount of money to get what I think is a superior product. They're pretty on par, and it's mostly what you would expect to pay for heavy sparring gloves for something like steel longsword for a HEMA tournament. So I think that they've done a really good job with these gloves. I really, really love them. I think small-handed folks are going to be very, very impressed with them. I've actually passed these out to some of my students who have small hands like me to try them and spar with them and drill with them, and they all love them too. So that's a very good thing for us small-handed folk, but of course they make larger sizes too. So if you've got larger hands and you're looking at trying to get something other than Spez Heavies, I think this is going to be a great option. So with that said, I hope you guys found this review helpful. If you're interested in purchasing your own pair of HF Armory gloves, you can check out their website right here below. Otherwise, I have swords to swing. Thanks again for watching, guys.